Enoch lived so close to God that instead of facing death, he was taken directly to heaven. He is known as the man who did not die, a biblical mystery that spans generations and inspires us to this day. In the beginning, the world was still a young earth, pulsing under the weight of the first human generations who were closer to God than any generation to come. But over time, humanity was moving away, day after day, from the essence of those who had created them. Adam and Eve's descendants now spread throughout the land, multiplying and building their lives, but corruption and violence began to lurk. These were difficult times, times of increasing darkness. And it was exactly at this time, marked by the mixture of the splendor of creation and the decadence of man, that Enoch came into the world. Born into the lineage of Seth, the third son of Adam, Enoch carried in his veins the same blood as those who had once walked in the Garden of Eden. Unlike many around him, he not only inherited the weight of the fall, but also a spark of a life focused on God. Ever since he was little, Enoch's eyes seemed to shine with a unique curiosity, as if he was searching for answers to questions that no one around him dared to ask. As the years passed, Enoch's fame began to grow. It was as if he carried something that other men had forgotten, a search for the divine essence that once habitore the heart of your lineage. This mysterious way and this thirst for something greater were like harbingers of a journey that was yet to come. And, while the world continued its dark pace, Enoch took each step towards a destiny far beyond the imagination, driven by something he could not yet name, but which called him to something extraordinary. As time passed, Enoch began to stand out even more among the men of his time. He was a man like any other, with common concerns and challenges, but there was something in his posture, his attentive gaze, and his quiet manner that aroused curiosity. While many around him sought to satisfy themselves with the distractions of everyday life, Enoch seemed to live in another dimension, a reality invisible to the eyes of most. He observed the world in a different way, as if he saw layers that escaped the hasty gaze of others. For him, the beauties of nature and the mystery of the sky were not just part of the scenery, they were signs of a greater presence. Everything around him seemed to speak of God. Enoch was an ordinary man, but he brought with him a thirst for something eternal, something pure and unknown, that burned like a fire within him. He knew, deep down, that the world had a purpose beyond what his eyes could see, and that there was a creator behind it all, waiting to be discovered. In the silence of starry nights, or in the shadows of trees at dusk, Enoch meditated, searching for answers. He felt he was being drawn into a communion that no one around him understood. The other men saw Enoch as eccentric, perhaps even distant. Little did they know that at every step he was guided by something that began to fill his soul and shape his destiny. There was a call, subtle, deep, that little by little became impossible to ignore. It was on one of those quiet nights that something different happened. Enoch, lost in his thoughts and prayers, felt a presence so strong that it was as if the very air around him was pulsing. There was a voice, not audible, but clear in his heart, like a whisper that resonated throughout his soul. It was a calling. Something was pulling him, awakening in him a certainty that God was looking for him, wanted to be closer to him. Enoch had never felt anything like this. It was as if his entire being was drawn to a purpose, a mission he didn't yet fully understand. From that day on, Enoch's life took a new direction. He realized that he could no longer live as before, busy with the passing things of the world. This call, this soft but firm voice, invited him to a higher path, a journey of surrender. It wasn't easy, as he knew that this path would take him away from the common life of other men. But Enoch was determined. He felt like this journey was bigger than him, bigger than everything he knew. And then, silently, he began to walk this path, seeking to live each day in the presence of God. With each step, Enoch felt that he was closer to unraveling the mystery of this calling, The people around him might not understand, but he knew he was where he was supposed to be. The feeling that something great was lurking, just waiting for his heart to be ready, was like a constant spark in his soul. Enoch moved forward, attentive and willing, without knowing that this path would lead him to experiences and revelations that no other man would ever experience. From that moment on, Enoch lived as a different man. His walk with God was not just a matter of belief or words, it was a relationship that guided every choice, every step. While the men around him ran after conquests, riches and pleasures, Enoch followed his own path, a lonely path in the eyes of others. He walked with God, and that was his greatest accomplishment. The life that others sought on earth, he found in communion with the Creator. This walk with God was not easy, but Enoch no longer had any doubts. There were days when he felt as if he were walking against the wind, when his faith was tested by the difficulties of everyday life. Still, nothing shook his conviction. He knew that the path he was taking was the right one. And every time doubt threatened to arise, the presence of God made itself felt, subtle and powerful, renewing his strength and filling his heart with peace. And it was like this, between faith and daily challenges, that Enoch became a living example of dedication and love for the Creator. He knew his journey was unique, and that certainty filled him. In those times of increasing violence and chaos, Enoch was like an oasis of serenity. Wherever he passed, his presence left a mark, like a ray of light passing through the shadow. People watched him, some admired, others suspicious, but no one could ignore his presence. Enoch did not seek approval. He did not seek honors. He only wanted one thing, to live in complete harmony with God. Every day, this communion became deeper, as if his steps took him beyond what was earthly. Enoch barely realized it, but his life was transforming into something beyond the ordinary, something that no one around him understood. He walked towards the invisible, without knowing that this path led him to something that would forever change the destiny of his story. With each passing day, Enoch's connection with God became more intense, deeper. It was as if, with each step he took, he was diving deeper into an ocean of peace and wisdom. He didn't just pray, he talked to God. He felt the Creator in everything around him, in the small wonders of everyday life, in the whisper of the trees, in the shine of the stars that cut through the dark sky. The world was no longer just a physical place for Enoch. It was a reflection of the divine presence. With this proximity, Enoch began to see beyond what human eyes could see. He was filled with a wisdom that was not of this world, as if God himself revealed to him hidden secrets, profound truths about good and evil, about creation and the mysteries of heaven. And yet Enoch remained humble, living his life with a simplicity that contrasted with the grandeur of the visions he received. He did not use this knowledge to exalt himself, but to reinforce his devotion and obedience. The other men, when observing Enoch, noticed that he was different, but they could not understand what made him so special. Enoch did not care about the opinions of others. He followed his path, faithful to the calling he felt. While the world around him was heading towards chaos, he lived in a parallel reality, in deep harmony, guided by the invisible hand of God. It was as if his soul was connected to a frequency that only he could hear, a divine melody that enveloped and transformed him. Enoch knew that his life was marked for something special, even without understanding what the future held for him. Every day he gave himself more, and God's presence was so strong that it seemed almost tangible. This sacred bond guided him to a destiny that he could not even imagine, but that awaited him with mysteries that, little by little, began to reveal themselves. Over time, Enoch's life became more than a mystery. It was a living testimony of God's presence among men. He didn't need to say much. His own way of living was like an open book that spoke of God's goodness and faithfulness. The people around him felt something different being around him, something that made them stop and wonder about life, about what really mattered. There was an almost palpable peace in Enoch's presence, as if heaven were always around him. Some saw him as an inspiration, proof that it was possible to live with integrity in a world full of corruption. Others, however, looked on suspiciously, perhaps even with a touch of fear. How could he live so peacefully while the world seemed to fall apart? Enoch, however, was not concerned with other people's reactions. His only concern was to be closer and closer to God. What he didn't realize was that his life became a light for those who were still searching for the right path, like a lighthouse in the midst of darkness. Even those who did not understand or accept their faith stayed touched in some way. It was as if Enoch's presence revealed, without words, a truth that no one could deny. He didn't isolate himself, but at the same time, he wasn't like the others. His unshakable faith made him a kind of bridge between the human and the divine. And every day that connection seemed to grow, illuminating everything around them with an intensity that couldn't be ignored. Time passed, and Enoch continued to walk with God, firm in his faith and conviction. He knew there was a purpose in all of this, a purpose greater than human understanding itself. And although he couldn't see what awaited him, he felt that something great was approaching, a destiny that only God himself could reveal. Enoch continued his journey, with his eyes turned upward, without realizing that his life was about to take a new step into the unknown. One day, in the midst of his reflections, Enoch began to feel something different in his heart. It was as if a profound vision was revealed to him, a glimpse of what was to come. In his walk with God, he began to see beyond the present, seeing images that spoke of a distant future full of mysteries and warnings. As if the Creator himself showed him the direction humanity was taking, Enoch was able to glimpse a divine judgment, a time in which God's justice would be fulfilled, would manifest over earth. These visions were not easy to bear. They came with a weight, a responsibility that Enoch had never experienced. He saw men increasingly given over to wickedness, pride taking over their hearts, and injustice spreading like a dark shadow. In the midst of these revelations, God showed him that he would not ignore evil forever. There would be a day when the Creator would judge the earth, bringing justice and balance. Enoch felt he needed to talk about it, to warn those around him, even though many would laugh or ignore it. Moved by the truth of the visions, Enoch began to share what he knew. His words were strong, full of authority, like thunder in a clear sky. He spoke about the coming judgment, about the need to turn to God before it was too late. Although some show indifferently, others listened to him with their hearts touched, feeling that those words brought something true and profound. Enoch knew that his mission was not to convince everyone, but to plant a seed, a reminder that God observes and acts. As he shared these truths, Enoch continued to walk with God, knowing that these visions were not only for others, but also for himself. The path he followed took him closer and closer to the Creator, and with each revelation, he felt that a new step in his journey was emerging on the horizon, just waiting for the right moment to be revealed. During this journey of deep connection with God, Enoch also experienced becoming a father. When Methuselah was born, his heart was filled with new joy and responsibility. He looked at his son in his arms and felt the weight of a future that would extend far beyond his own days. Methuselah, over time, would become the longest-lived man in history, carrying with him the heritage of a lineage marked by the desire to follow God's will. Enoch, in his silent wisdom, took care that his son grew up knowing the fear and righteousness that were already hallmarks of his family. But Enoch knew that his role did not end there. He felt that somehow his lineage was destined for something great and at the same time terrible. His intuition told him that the world was getting closer and closer to a breaking point, a moment when God's justice would be broken, would manifest. And this certainty wasn't just a vague sensation. It was a profound understanding, as if he could see future generations in his mind, including the one who would one day witness a great flood. Years passed, and Methuselah grew up under Enoch's guidance, becoming part of a lineage that would be crucial to the future of humanity. Enoch lived to see the generation of his grandson Lamech, and then Noah. There was something special about Noah, a sparkle in his eyes that reminded Enoch of himself, of that call to a greater purpose. Although Enoch may not have known what the future held for Noah, he felt in his heart that his grandson would be of great importance in God's plans. And so time passed, and Enoch remained the pillar of his family, a living example of faith and communion with God. Each day alongside Methuselah and his descendants was a reminder that he was part of something much bigger. He saw the continuity of his journey reflected in the eyes of his children and grandchildren, feeling that the Creator was preparing the way for them, while his own destiny awaited him, with mysteries getting closer and closer. As the years passed, Enoch's closeness to God became so intense that he no longer seemed to completely belong to this world. It was as if his soul dwelt in a space between heaven and earth, in a communion that enveloped him in a way no one around him could understand. While other men dealt with their struggles and passions, Enoch walked in silence, enveloped in a peace that went beyond earthly concerns. His relationship with God had reached such a deep level that he often seemed absent to others, as if his mind and spirit were in another dimension. Enoch lived on an invisible frequency, connected to something that was as real to him as the very ground beneath his feet. Words were no longer necessary to communicate with God. All it took was a thought, a sigh, and he felt the divine presence responding in a subtle but powerful way. It was a connection that took him further and further away from the physical world and brought him closer to something eternal. This spiritual intensity was felt by those around him, who noticed in Enoch an unusual light, a calm that inspired and unsettled at the same time. He was a living mystery, a man who walked the earth but seemed to already inhabit the heavens. And day after day, he felt something else approaching, a calling higher than time and space itself, a destiny that was beyond any human understanding. Then something happened that no one could explain. On a day like any other, in the midst of his silent search for God, Enoch simply disappeared. The people around him, family, neighbors, everyone looked for him, searching every corner where he could be. They called his name, went to the places he used to frequent, but it was as if he had dissolved into thin air. There was no trace, no sign, just the void where until recently there was that singular man whose presence brought a peace that everyone now missed. The news spread quickly, and soon the story of his disappearance was told with astonishment. Some believed that he had been taken by God, that the Creator himself took him for himself, while others were perplexed, trying to find a more practical explanation. But there was no explanation that could satisfy restless hearts. Enoch was no longer among them, and that was a fact. To those who knew him well, his absence seemed to make sense somehow, as if his entire life had been a harbinger of this moment. Enoch had always been different, like someone who already belonged to another reality. Perhaps, some thought, God had really taken him. Those who had seen his faith, his deep peace, and his way of living could think of no other explanation. And so, he became a legend, a mystery, a man who did not know death, but who in the blink of an eye disappeared like the wind, leaving behind only the silence of a destiny that no one would ever fully understand. Enoch's disappearance brought with it a mystery that seemed to touch the souls of everyone around him. The stories they told about him took on an almost sacred tone, as if they were echoes of something divine. They said that God had taken him because his life on earth could no longer contain such closeness to heaven. Enoch became a living legend, a sign that, by walking with God with a pure heart, it is possible to transcend one's own human destiny. Enoch's absence left people silent, reflecting on what that really meant. Many saw his departure as a powerful metaphor, a reminder that the walk with God could be so profound that surpassed the borders of common life. Others looked to the sky for answers, wondering where the man was who once walked among them and now seemed to dwell among the stars. Those who had the privilege of knowing Enoch in life remembered every detail of his presence: the serene look, the wise words, the tranquility he emanated. Its story was passed down from generation to generation like a precious secret. Little by little, he became not just a man of faith, but a bridge between the visible and invisible world, a constant reminder that there is more to life than meets the eye. And as these stories spread, new hope was born. Enoch had left a legacy, a path of faith and closeness to God that many now wanted to follow, knowing that by walking with the Creator, extraordinary destinies awaited. And this desire spread silently like a subtle call that day after day waited for the next person who dared to respond. Over time, Enoch's story became a symbol of hope and mystery for all who heard it. He was not just the man who disappeared without a trace, but the man who experienced God's presence so intensely that he crossed the line between heaven and earth. For many, Enoch was proof that the Creator was closer than they could imagine, and that walking with him was a possible calling, an invitation to a life that did not end in human limitations. Every detail of his story was told with reverence. The man who walked with God, who lived among people but already carried within him the glow of the invisible. His steps, his faith, his way of seeing the world were remembered as an example. Enoch had not been a perfect man, but he was a dedicated man, someone who chose God's path at a time when few cared. His life was an open letter that, even after his departure, continued to be read, inspiring everyone to follow their own steps of faith. Elders whispered his story in the starry nights, and young people listened with shining eyes, feeling the same call in their hearts. Enoch had lived with such devotion that he became eternal in the memory of the people, an invisible link that linked them to the Creator himself. And so, his story began to echo through the generations as a living reminder that, by walking with God, we can touch that which is eternal and perhaps one day become part of that sacred mystery. The story of Enoch, even so ancient, remains alive like a whisper that echoes through time, bringing with it profound lessons. What makes this journey so special is not just the fact that he was taken by God without going through death. It is the way he lived, with a surrendered heart and a tireless desire to be close to the Creator. Enoch shows us that walking with God is not about distance or intangibility, but about choice and closeness, a commitment that is renewed at every step, every day. His life teaches us that true faith is silent, deep, and shaped in the small decisions of each day. Enoch did not need recognition or glory. He lived for God, and that was his greatest triumph. The simplicity with which he walked alongside the Creator reminds us that, in the end, it is the quality of our communion with God that defines us, much more than the deeds we accomplish or what we possess. In every generation, there are those who hear the call to walk with God in a more intimate way. Enoch's story serves as a reminder that this journey is possible for everyone. He inspires us to seek this peace, this deep connection that crosses human understanding and brings us closer to the sacred. Perhaps, like Enoch, we will never fully understand what is on the other side of this walk, but he showed us that when we choose to walk with God, we connect to something greater than ourselves, something eternal and full of mysteries. If you liked Enoch's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.